Hello friends, I am Saket again and we are back with our second lesson, and today we will talk about Scrum. In previous lesson we discussed about agile values, agile principles, we spoke about agile project management framework, and we also spoke about various agile methodology. Scrum is one of the agile methodology which is prominently used around the world. In today's session we will talk about empirical process, how it is different from defined process, what is empirical process is all about. We will talk about Scrum, we will talk about Scrum rules, ceremonies and artifacts. Empirical process. So the models, the problems which are not clearly defined, the models which are very imperfect in nature are not suitable for defined processes. If we cannot model the transition of input to an output very accurately, we cannot apply the defined processes for that particular problem. And to address those type of processes, we need to use empirical process. In empirical process, rather than controlling the output and its variance from or its deviation from the standard expected output, the process is controlled by frequent inspection and adaptation. So empirical model is a process model which is suitable for imperfectly defined, unpredictable, unrepeatable processes, and the control mechanism which empirical process uses is inspection and adaptation. Unlike empirical processes, defined processes are predictable. They produces output repetitively, output of acceptable quality. For example, the process of making a burger at a fast food restaurant is a defined process. There are defined inputs, there is a defined process, and it generates a burger of an acceptable quality. The process of servicing a car at a car service station is also a defined process. It goes through a sequence of activity and it generates a predictable, acceptable, repeatable output. So when to use defined process and when to use empirical process? We should use defined processes wherever we can use them, because they are easy, they are cheap. Once the output generated out of defined processes are of less price. But we should not be using defined processes for the problems which are not clearly defined, where the underlying mechanisms are not predictable. We should not be using defined processes where process model itself is not fairly defined. So we should use a defined process where the underlying mechanism is well understood. We have to use empirical processes for the processes which are too complicated for the defined processes. Defined processes gives you a cost advantage because they produce a product at a price of a commodity. But once you apply a defined process to an area which is not yet defined fairly well, the process may produce a commodity which is not of an acceptable quality. For example, if you are creating a new product, new software, where the requirement is not yet visualized or felt by the end user, and you go with the initial scope statement which you have received in a way that everything is predictable, you may end up producing something which is not acceptable, not desired by the end customer, because you applied the defined process to a problem where the output, the output was not yet fairly defined. So, graph talks about that if your technology is less complex, if your requirements are fairly defined, then you can use simple or a defined process. For example, you have been developing a website using a content management software called say Joomla or WordPress, and you have defined inputs that these many pages need to be deployed to this particular template. You already well understand about that technology evolve in that particular WordPress, you may go with the defined process, because your inputs are certain, your output is fairly predictable, requirements are well understood. But the same problem, if the company is doing this website development for the first time, even the end customer is not clear about what kind of site they want to have, then your requirement is not yet agreed. Then you may need to follow an empirical process which recommends short incremental cycles of inspection and adaptation. The defined processes get controlled by the output by measuring the variance or a deviation against an expected outcome. Now, since empirical processes are not yet fairly defined, you cannot control them using an output variance. For example, if I know that this particular problem always takes 7 hours to solve, and I have a historical data which talks about that mean time for solving this particular problem is 7 hours, I can always control my developers, my programmers, that by using that benchmark. Whenever they go beyond 7 hours, I can raise the flag and say that what happened to you. But when you don't have that 7-hour baseline, you don't know how much time it will take, you cannot control your process by just comparing the variances. And the empirical processes get controlled by transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Whatever you do should be transparent to the stakeholders. And whatever you do, you should do in a short cycles, which gives you an opportunity to explore, inspect, and correct your future course of action. So empirical processes get controlled by transparency and frequent inspection and adaptation. So let's talk about Scrum, our second. Scrum is an agile process. It's one of the agile methodology. It focuses on small iterations of 1 month or less. So 2 weeks to 1 month. 1 month is a default time frame which is given to the Scrum iteration. It talks about that it works in a framework where business sets the priority and team works to deliver those priorities to the business by way of self-organizing themselves. And it also follows rapid repetition of inspection and adaptation. So it's an empirical process where you run for an iteration, where you explore the product in that particular iteration, and then after that you inspect that how things are going, you inspect your product, you inspect your process, and you take an adaptation for your future or for your next iteration. So it's a agile process which focuses on delivering in short cycles. It focuses on inspection and adaptation. It works in a format where business sets the priority and team delivers it, and the iteration cycles is 1 month is an recommended iteration cycle, but it should be 1 month or less than that. Characteristics: teams should be self-organizing. You develop things in a sprints, which is synonym of iterations. So you have a time boxed sprints of 1 month or less. Requirements get capturized in the format of product backlog. So there is a list of requirement which we name them a product backlog. There is no specific engineering practice prescribed in Scrum. It is usually team uses Scrum along with many XP practices, but as far as Scrum is concerned, the Scrum methodology is not recommending any of the engineering practice, and it's one of the agile processes. So it follows agile values and principles. So things starts from a product backlog. A product owner or a business has a set of requirements, and those requirements are captured in the format of a product backlog, which is a list of the requirement. And on the basis of a product backlog, we decide on a sprint cycle. So we decide a duration for a sprint, that it would be a 30 days or 2 weeks or 4 weeks. So we start with a product. We think of a duration, that this is how we are going to explore our product or our requirement in these. This would be the duration of that exploration cycle. And then team, on the basis of their delivering capacity, takes items from the product backlog for creating a sprint backlog which will get worked on during the sprint. So I repeat again, we started with a set of requirement and we visualized or decided on a duration of an exploration cycle, which is like a sprint cycle. We decided, okay, we will go with a 30 days sprint. We had a requirement, we had a 30 days of a bandwidth or a resource time available to us, and then team takes the items out of product backlog and detail them out, break them out into an engineering tasks, and record those engineering tasks in a artifact called sprint backlog. And after that they start developing it. At the end of that 30 days or a sprint cycle, they deliver a potentially shippable product or a potentially shippable increment. So at the end of a sprint, we have a potential shippable increment. It's a potentially shippable. Product owner can take a call. Is it really going to ship to the end user, or it is for inspection or adaptation and product demo only? It depends. Like if you are done with your minimum marketable features, you may deploy it to your end customer. If you are not, then you may keep it at your test environment only. But it is potentially shippable, which means that it has all the ingredients which makes it deployable at a production. During the sprint, you have during the sprint, product owner keeps working on grooming the product backlog. So he keeps adding new product items, keeps prioritizing those product items, and keeps grooming it for the team for the next sprint. So the team is working on producing the output, and product owner is on the same time, product owner is grooming the product backlog. And in sprint, we have a meeting of a daily scrum meeting where on a 24-hour cycle we identify how are we doing. We have a collaboration and coordination meeting which is called daily scrum meeting. Sprint. So sprint is an synonym of iteration. In extreme programming we use the term iteration. It's a typical duration for a stream, as we spoke in previous slide as well. It's a 30 days, 30 calendar days. So it's like a 30 calendar days is a default or a typical duration of a sprint. Whenever we talk about any time box, usually we refer a 30-day sprint. When in any Scrum literature, if you find that okay, the sprint planning meeting should take 8 hours, it means that the 8 hours are given for a 30 days sprint. And it is always recommended to have a constant duration for a sprint. We should not have, like initially we may run with a 2 weeks sprint and then gradually we increase or decrease the duration of the sprints. The sprint should be of a constant duration because that gives a rhythm, that gives us an adaptable benchmarks, which helps us in identifying how well we are moving forward. In a particular sprint, the product is designed, coded and tested in the same particular sprint. It is not like that we are only doing a sprint for exploring the requirement and in the next sprint we are going to design or develop it. It is always recommended we should design, code and test the product, the increment of a product during the same sprint. Scrum development is not a sequential development. Sometimes we get a feel or we make an assumption that okay, in a Scrum we need to work in a short delivery cycles, but okay, inside that particular delivery cycle we still need to run a phase of requirement, then design, coding and testing, and that can run in a sequential way. We sometimes visualize that we would be running a mini waterfall, a small waterfall for that particular month. This is what is not expected. The Scrum team should be doing little of everything all the time. Every day they would be thinking about writing requirement. They would be designing that particular code which has been written, where the requirements has been identified, and then testing keeps happening as the things gets done. So we do a little of everything all the time. Rather than doing things sequentially in this particular manner, we do requirement and then we start with design, then we start with development and then testing, and at the end of the sprint everything comes together and we deliver a potentially shippable product. Now let's talk about Scrum Framework. Scrum Framework is built using three elements. One is Scrum roles, another is scrum-ceremonies, and third is Scrum artifacts. So in the subsequent slides, we will get into the Scrum roles, ceremonies, and artifacts. Before we move further, let us recap what we have discussed till now. Process of making burger at a fast food center or a restaurant is defined process as it produces burger of acceptable quality repeatedly. Does Scrum recommend specific engineering practice? No, but usually Scrum team use some of the XP practices. Is a Scrum Master is the same like a project manager? We have not spoken about it, but this is a frequently asked question in all the trainings. It is not. And in the next section we will talk about the Scrum roles, and we will emphasize further the difference between a Scrum Master and a project manager. Is it okay to run some of the sprints just for capturing requirement? No. We do little of everything all the time. Now, in some typical cases, you may have a longer discovery phase where before you start even doing running iterations, we spoke about iteration 0 in our previous lesson, you may have a iteration 0 of a longer duration if the project is too complex. But once you start following Scrum iteration 1 onwards, you should be delivering, you should be doing little of everything all the time. Is the Scrum duration fixed for 30 days, 30 calendar days? It's not fixed, but it is recommended to have 1 month or less. Is the sprint and iteration are the same? Yes. It's a time boxed event of 1 month or less. So sprint is a time boxed event of 1 month or less. Next section we will talk about Scrum roles. We have 3 roles: Product Owner, Scrum Master, and Team. Now, Product Owner represents business to the team. He is the one who controls the requirement. He is responsible for filtering, prioritizing, elaborating requirements. He is the one who defines the features. He has right to accept or reject work done by the team. He is responsible for overall profitability of the project, and he is the one who decides the release date on the basis of market requirement and team capacity. So team publish their capacity. They talks about, okay, we can do this much in a month, which is in a technical term called a velocity, and on the basis of team's velocity and product backlog, he decides the release date. He is the one who keeps shuffling features during the sprint. Usually a powerful person who has influential and negotiation skills, because the product owner is a role whose responsibility is also towards the other stakeholders. The other stakeholders are trusting him or authorizing him to prioritize the product backlog, prioritize the requirement for the development team. So he needs to negotiate, he needs to work with the external world and then take a final call on the priorities. For the team, he is the one who tells which is required now and which is required later. But in turn, he may take inputs from many stakeholders. There could be a product development team which talks about what is their roadmap. There could be a marketing, there could be a maintenance support team. They may be having some request which can ease their support work. So he has to manage, balance the priorities coming from various stakeholders and part of the organization. Scrum Master, he represents the management to the project. He is responsible for ensuring that Scrum practices are followed in a team. He is not responsible for delivery, but he is responsible for creating a team which can deliver. So it's not like that he is not at all responsible. He is responsible for creating a self-organizing team, and the self-organizing team should deliver. He ensures the team is fully functional and productive. He is the one who is responsible for removing impediments. If team is facing some issues which is beyond the control of the team, for example, they are expecting some interface document from some other team which is not yet received, he is the one who needs to sort it out. If team is facing an infrastructure issue, they need a server to run their integration build and they are not getting it, he is the one who is responsible for resolving it. So he is the one who ensures the Scrum practices, values are implemented in the team. He is the one who is responsible for removing impediments. He is the one who is responsible for creating a self-organizing team. And he works as a shield for the team from external interferences. So team gets isolated from external interferences by way of Scrum Master coming in between and letting the team do their work and managing the stakeholders on his level. So here is the team. Team is the one who delivers. It's a cross-functional. Typical size 5 to 9. So like 7 plus minus 2. So a Scrum team can vary from 5 people to the 9 people. It's a cross-functional team. So everybody who is required for the project, tester, user experience, everybody falls under this particular team. Sometimes you may have part-time members, sometime, but usually it is always recommended that you should have a full-time member. But some specialized skills like database administrator or a system level architects who just provide the guidelines may remain as an external or a shared resource. Teams should be self-organizing. There should not be titles, and membership should change only between the sprints. Like if you want to change a team member because of any reason, you should target to have that change at the end of a sprint. So we should target not to have changes in a membership during the sprint cycle. So now we discussed the Scrum roles. So we have again, I recapitalize that we have 3 roles: a Scrum Master, a Product Owner, and the team. Scrum Master is responsible for creating self-organizing team. He ensures that Scrum is getting followed in a team. Product Owner is a business representative to the team. Product Owner decides the priorities, he controls the budgets, and team is the one who delivers it, and they are self-organizing. So let's get into the Scrum ceremonies. So we have 4 Scrum ceremonies, and the first is sprint planning, then we have a daily Scrum meeting, then we have a sprint review, and then sprint retrospective. If you look in a dimension of plan, do, check, act, so we start with the sprint planning. Sprint planning is a planning activity. Then we do a doing, so we sprint for a 30 days or for the sprint duration. And then during those 30 days, every day we conduct a daily stand-ups, which are a collaboration and coordination event, which helps us in doing our things better. So sprinting and daily stand-up is a part of doing. And then at the end of a sprint, we have a sprint review meeting where we check the product. And once the sprint review is done, then we have a sprint retrospective where we check the process and also decides what to do to improve further. So we start with the planning. So sprint planning is a planning part of plan, do, check, act, and then doing part is doing sprinting during the 30 days and doing daily stand-up meetings, which is doing and monitoring and collaboration event. And at the end of a sprint, we take a product feedback by by demonstrating the product to the bigger stakeholders, we identify what is going good, what needs to be corrected, and we do a sprint retrospective where we take a process feedback, where we identify what is working well for the team and what needs to be improved. And this is how our cycle of plan, do, check, act keeps moving. Sprint planning. So it's a activity where team and product owner collaborate to identify which part of a product backlog can be turned into a potential shippable product in an upcoming sprint. So it has two segments. Segment 1 talks about selecting the product backlog for a given or for a coming sprint, and the second part is for the team, where they create and identify tasks which are required for converting the selected product backlog into a increment or a running functionality. So this is how it looks like. We start with a team capacity, which sometimes also looked as a velocity, and a product backlog. And in the first section, we analyze and evaluate product backlog, and we agree on sprint goal. In a first section, the product owner takes a lead in identifying the requirements, because he is the one who grooms the product backlog. Product backlog should be groomed before starting the sprint planning meeting. It is not expected that in a sprint planning meeting, product owner and team are discussing about the priority of the requirement. So product owner should do the prioritization before, and during the sprint planning meeting, the first half of the sprint planning meeting, the discussion should be what all can be taken for converting into a functionality. And to represent what is this sprint is all about, we should write a small sprint goal which will guide us while doing part of work during 30 days, and it get represented in the format of sprint goal. In the second section of a sprint planning meeting, the team breaks the selected product backlog into a manageable tasks. They are engineering tasks, and the team also do an estimation in form of ideal hours for those tasks. So if we see a sprint planning meeting, it has two buckets or two segments. The first segment talks about the goal of first segment is select the business features which can be developed in a coming month or in a coming iteration or in a coming sprint. And the second section is, okay, we have selected these 3 items. Now how are we going to convert these 3 items into a running functionality? Let us break those 3 items into an engineering task, and let us estimate ideal hours or do an estimation against all those engineering tasks. So this is all what happens in a sprint planning meeting. We will talk about estimation at length in our estimation lesson, but as of now we can just get an idea that okay, in a sprint planning meeting we create a sprint backlog. Now this is like a sequence. So product owner is responsible for providing a prioritized product backlog to the team. Team is responsible for creating a sprint backlog, and Scrum Master facilitates this interaction. So in teams select item from the product backlog, they can commit to complete. So there are 2-3 ways of selecting those items. The one way of is that we just go with the declared velocity or an estimated velocity. We can think of that, okay, we can a team can do a work of X story points, and they select the product backlog on the basis of that X story point. There could be another way where team evaluate each and every product backlog item and commit that can they do it during the upcoming sprint or not. So there could be a commitment driven selection, there could be a velocity driven selection, and once that selection is done, sprint backlog gets created where the team breaks the task into a engineering activities and given estimation. For example, like we have a story. As a vacation planner, I want to see a photo of the hotel, and then this story may needs to be converted into coding, user interface designing, writing text fixtures, classes, updating performance results, etc., etc., etc. And all these tasks need to be estimated in the form of ideal hours. The daily Scrum meeting. This is a meeting which happens every day. What is the goal of daily Scrum meeting? Sometimes we feel that it's a status meeting for a Scrum Master, and from exam point of view, this is something which we should remove from our mind. It is not a status meeting for a Scrum Master, but it's an event, it's a ceremony which helps us in achieving fine-grained coordination. It helps us people committing about their next 24 hours work. It's a place where impediments get raised. And this is a place where people also work because of a peer pressure. They came to know what the other person is doing, and if the person is not performing at par, he will get pressurized by the other team members' performance. And it also assesses that how well we are moving towards the sprint goal, progressing towards the sprint goal. So in a sprint duration, this is our monitoring mechanism, this is our coordination mechanism, where the team takes a look at their progress and think and also commit what they are going to do in next 24 hours. Some parameters, it happens daily, it happens at the fixed time. That time it should be time boxed for 15 minutes. It is always recommended to finish the daily Scrum meeting in 15 minutes, even if everybody has not got an opportunity to speak about their work, because until unless we start practicing the time box, things will not improve. It's not a place where we start discussing one technical problem. This is not a place where all the escalation happens. And team is responsible for conducting this meeting. It's not a Scrum Master's responsibility for conducting this meeting, but Scrum Master has to ensure that team is conducting this meeting. There are the 3 questions. So product owner is not a member, or it's not a participant of this particular meeting. He can remain there as an observer. Scrum Master is just a facilitator for this particular meeting, and team talks about these 3 questions. What did you do yesterday? What will you do today? And is there anything in your way? If there is anything in your way, that goes into a impediment list, and which falls under Scrum Master's responsibility. So team should limit their discussion to these 3 points, and if somebody wants to give an advice for solving some particular problem, those kind of discussions should happen outside the daily Scrum. The next sprint ceremony is a sprint review. It's a check part of that plan do cycle. Sprint review, team presents what they have accomplished during the sprint. Typically it takes a form of a demo. They need to demonstrate the learning software. We should not be using presentation for presenting the progress. The software should be presented as evidence of a progress, because Agile believes in working software, and whole team participates. And this is the place, this is a ceremony where we invite all the possible stakeholders. So everybody is present, they can comment, they can provide a feedback on the work which team has done during the sprint. The product needs to be presented by the team. The team member can take a lead in presenting a product, and team members should rotate among themselves for taking an opportunity of presenting. A Scrum Master should not be presenting the product in a sprint review. So team demos the product. Team shows that this is what we have developed in last 1 month or in last sprint. Product owner, stakeholders can provide feedback on it, and Scrum Master is there to facilitate the sprint review. He's the one who sends the meeting request. He's the one who ensures that meeting happens, all the infrastructure, all the logistics are in place, and he is the one who also schedule the next sprint review. So at the end of a sprint review, The Scrum Master should also broadcast the date and time for the next sprint review. The last ceremony of a sprint retrospective. This is a place where we analyze, adapt, inspect how good we are doing from process point of view. Are we working efficiently? What all changes we should make in order to improve our development process further, in order to make our sprint more enjoyable. It is done after it is like a last ceremony of a sprint, and Scrum Master team participates in it. Sprint retrospective is primarily for the team. It's a ceremony for the team to inspect and adapt on the processes, on the way they are working. They need to identify what is working for them and what requires an improvement. This is not a place to bring complaints. This is not a place to criticize somebody else's behavior. This is a ceremony where the team they retrospect and identify what is doing good and what is not working. Product owner is an optional participant of sprint retrospective. There could be various format of conducting sprint retrospective. We have a separate lesson on a retrospective. There we will talk about various activities which a team can take in order to generate or in order to identify what is working and what is not working. One format could be that team identify what should they start doing, what should they stop doing, and what should they continue doing. So they categorize their actions, their ways of working, and identify what should they stop, what should they start, and what should they continue doing. So let us take a recap. Sprint starts with which ceremony? Sprint planning meeting. So sprint planning meeting is the meeting which happens at the beginning of the sprint. This is the first ceremony of a sprint. And sprint ends with which ceremony? Sprint retrospective. So we start with the sprint planning, then we sprint for 30 days, then we have a sprint review, a product demo, and then we have a sprint retrospective in which we may identify some of the actions which need to be included in the next sprint's planning or next sprint's backlog, and after that we have again a sprint planning meeting for the next sprint. Which Scrum ceremony happens every day? Daily Scrum. So stand-up meeting for 15 minutes duration where people limit their discussion on 3 questions, and it's a coordination and collaboration meeting. Scrum Master facilitates it, and it's a Teams meeting. In which particular ceremony the stakeholders are allowed to speak or invited to speak? Sprint review. So sprint review is a ceremony where stakeholders are invited and they are allowed to make comments, feedbacks on the product. Who represents management to the Scrum team? Scrum Master. Who is responsible for identifying tasks and assigned to the team member? For example, you have one story and you have broken those that particular story has been divided into various tasks. Now who is responsible for allocating those tasks to the team member? Sometimes we think that it falls under the responsibility of Scrum Master, and that is what the project manager used to do. But in Scrum, it is done by the self-organizing team. It is not expected from the Scrum Master to allocate resources or to assign resources to the tasks, but he needs to ensure the team does it on their own. Who facilitates the sprint retrospective? Scrum Master. So all facilitation role by default goes to the Scrum Master. Who prioritized the product backlog? Business representative of a Scrum team, product owner. So we are at the last section of our Scrum presentation, and in this particular section we will talk about Scrum artifacts. We have 3 Scrum artifacts: product backlog, sprint backlog, and increment. This is the same diagram which we saw in the beginning, and everything starts from the product backlog. So this is the first artifact, and then the second artifact which gets created in the sprint planning meeting is a sprint backlog. Then we work for a 30 days or a sprint duration and generate a potential shippable product which is called increment. So these are the 3 Scrum artifacts: a product backlog, sprint backlog, and an increment. It's a list of all desired work. It's a list of requirements. The item rows in this particular list is called product backlog item. You can have stories as a product backlog item, user stories as a product backlog item. You can have a use cases as a product backlog item. You can have a defects as a product backlog items. You can have a features as a product backlog item. Scrum does not mandate that you should have only user stories as a product backlog item. So it's a list of desired work which team should be doing, and but every row of this particular list is called product backlog item. Now it should be expressed in a way which adds value to the end user or the customer, because as per the Scrum Agile values, we manage the things from customer or a business value oriented outputs. We do not develop or divide the work in a tasks, but we always focus on features which gives an benefit or some output to the end user or a purchaser. Product backlog is prioritized by the product owner, and it gets reprioritized at the start of each sprint. During the sprint also product backlog keeps getting prioritized, and the product owner presents the prioritized product backlog to the team at the beginning of the sprint and during the sprint planning meeting. So during the sprint review or during the course of discussions or during the project life cycle, product owner keeps getting various feedbacks on the features, on the desired features which the product should have. The product owner has a role to analyze all the feedbacks, all the enhancement inputs, and prioritize for the team. And the prioritized product backlog has the high priority item on the top of the product backlog, and those items are given to the team during the sprint planning meeting. And in a sprint planning meeting, team creates the sprint backlog which contains the tasks which are required to be completed in order to complete product backlog into a potentially shippable product or an increment, the third artifact. There is a acronym coined by Roman and Mike, DEEP. So product backlog should be detailed appropriately, should be emergent in nature. So it is something which is emerging. It is not something which is fixed. It should be estimated. So the items in a product backlog should have estimates, and it should be prioritized. So DEEP is a good acronym to remember the good characteristics of a product backlog. It should be appropriately detailed appropriately. It should be emergent. It should be estimated and prioritized. Some of the constituents of a product backlog. As a product backlog items, you can have a features, you can have a change, you can have a defects, you can have a technical improvement, you can have a knowledge acquisition goals. So product backlog item can have these elements. Features could be written in the form of user stories. Changes could be in the form of a user story which is getting changed from X to Y. So for example, in this particular slide, I am giving an example where user wants to change the ordering of the existing result set, a search result. You may have a defects as a product backlog item, because those also need to be prioritized, and it's a kind of practice. Some team follow, some don't, but it's good to have a prioritization mechanism for the defects, and we only use term defect for the issues, for the feedbacks which gets identified in a done stories. Technical improvements also become a part of product backlog item, and even knowledge acquisition for the future project need or for the future releases can also become a part of product backlog item. This is an example where you have some of the requirements, even some of the technical requirements which is given, and then you have estimates given. Now, how to estimate product backlog? We will talk in an estimation lesson, where we will look into ideal days, story points, and other techniques, planning poker and other techniques which are practiced for estimating a product backlog. Sprint backlog. So sprint backlog defines the work the team will do. It is a collection of engineering tasks, and this list is also emergent during the sprint. It is not like that the team will only make the sprint backlog during the sprint planning meeting. During the course of a sprint, during the iteration, the team may find few of the engineering tasks which needs to be included in the sprint backlog, or they may also identify few of the tasks which are not required to be done from the sprint backlog. So sprint backlog items can be deleted and added, modified by the team member during the sprint. The tasks which are in progress should have a responsible person assigned to it. So all the tasks which are under development or under progress should have a team member or should have a person assigned to it. Now each task should have an information that how much time is left remaining in order to complete that particular task. What does it mean? If you have 10 items in your sprint backlog, the items which are all the 10 items must have estimate in ideal hours, which talks about that this much time is left to finish this particular item. So in general, we are not concerned about that how much time has been spent for that particular item, but the sprint backlog must have an information that how much time is more required to finish this particular sprint backlog item. As we spoke about sprint goals during the sprint planning meeting section, the sprint goals and sprint backlog are the artifacts which get created during the sprint planning meeting, and sprint goal is a short statement which talks about the goal of a sprint in a crisp manner, which can guide the team while they are sprinting. Now, managing the sprint backlog, as we spoke about, individuals sign up for their work. Estimate work remaining is updated daily. In general, before daily stand-up meeting, this should have been updated, and the Scrum Master should have plotted the sprint burn-down chart on the basis of this information. So what is sprint burn-down chart? That we will see during the monitoring, but at this particular point, we can assume, we can take a guideline that the remaining work should be updated daily in the sprint backlog. Any team member can add, delete or change the sprint backlog item, and because they can add, delete and change, the sprint backlog is emergent in nature, and it is not necessary that during the sprint planning meeting you have a detailed tasks constituting the sprint backlog. In beginning of your iteration, you may have a task at a higher level, but as you move forward, they may get detailed out further. So if you look in a role point of view, the sprint backlog is created, maintained by the Scrum team, and this is a backlog which get frequently discussed in a daily Scrum meeting. The task the team is discussing during daily Scrum meeting is coming out of a sprint backlog only, because whatever they are working on is identified in a sprint backlog. So in a daily Scrum, they talk about which particular sprint backlog item they are working on and which particular sprint backlog item they are taking today. The final artifact of a Scrum is an increment. In many Scrum literature, you will not find this artifact mentioned clearly. Many blogs talks about 3 artifacts of Scrum, where they talk about product backlog, Scrum backlog, and burn down chart. But if you go to the PMI reference material, if you look at Scrum guide and the book written by the creators of the Scrum, they speak about the 3rd artifact, which is an increment. So increment is a incremental work. It's an integrated incremental work which has been done during the sprint. So it's an increment of a product backlog features which has been implemented before, and the increment is added during this particular sprint. Now this increment should be usable, should be complete in nature, and it's a potentially shippable product. So product owner may not ship it, but if he wish, he can give that increment directly to the end users. So what signifies it? The increment should have all the database migration scripts, all the installation scripts, everything in it. It should be taken as a deployable increment. Now when we say one particular story is done in Scrum, it is recommended that we should have a clear understanding of what done is mean, and done should be understood by everyone in the Scrum team. So there is a term called definition of done. It could be maintained in the form of checklist. It could be also maintained in the form of a document where the team lists out that when they mark a story done, what all is included in that particular criteria. Like, does it mean that story has been tested? Does it mean the regression testing has been performed? Does it mean that it is checked in at a production server or at an integration server? So all the steps which are required in order to mark the story done is written in a definition of done. Now definition of done may vary from one Scrum team to another Scrum team, but it is usually recommended, it is always recommended to include an acceptance from a product owner as a part of definition of done. And it is also not necessary to keep the definition of done stable throughout the project life cycle. Like during the project retrospective or during the sprint retrospective, you may identify that these are the few things you should include in your definition of done, which can make your process better and your sprint more enjoyable. So if you have that kind of action item out of retrospective, your definition of done may get changed during the project or during the release. So the increment is a collection of done stories, so you start your work from a sprint planning, you create a sprint backlog, and according to a sprint backlog you finish your work, you mark them done as per your criteria or definition of done, and these done things forms an increment, and this particular increment get demonstrated in a sprint retrospective to the stakeholders and to the product owner. So increment is is a working software output which comes out of a sprint. So let us do a quick recap of whatever we have discussed in a second segment of our product backlog is input to which Scrum meeting? Sprint planning meeting. So product backlog goes as an input to a sprint planning meeting, and sprint backlog get created in a sprint planning meeting. What is the output of sprint planning meeting? Sprint backlog. I spoke about it. Can team member add, delete, change? Okay, which team member can add, delete, change items in which backlog? Product backlog or a sprint backlog? Definitely sprint backlog. They cannot change the things from product backlog because product backlog is maintained and controlled by product owner. What defines the functionality is done? How do we know that this functionality is done, this story is done? Definition of done tells us the checkpoints, the expectation, and if the story is done as per the definition of done, then only we can mark it done. At the end of the sprint, team delivers increment of potentially shippable product functionality. So increment gets delivered at the end of the sprint. Who creates the sprint backlog? Team creates the sprint backlog. What get demoed in a sprint review meeting? Increment. Product owner uses which artifact to manage requirement? Product backlog. So this marks the completion of our lesson 2. We will get into more details of planning, sprint planning, creation of a sprint backlog. We will talk about how the burn down get plotted in our subsequent lessons. We have a separate lesson which is dealing retrospective, like what all needs to be done in retrospective. So we have a dedicated lesson for retrospective. In general, till now people are observing 10 to 15 questions coming out of Scrum, and good amount of questions come from Scrum roles. You can expect 4 to 5 questions around Scrum roles. What is the role of a product owner, Scrum Master, team? And we have a detailed presentation which is just focusing on these 3 roles. It would be a good idea. You can find them that presentation in additional resources to look at that particular presentation, because that presentation itself will give you hints or answers for 4 or 5 questions which you would be seeing in exam. So in the subsequent lessons also we would be talking something which is coming under the Scrum framework. We will talk about, when we talk about estimation, which is again becomes a part of product backlog. When we talk about prioritization, then we talk about how the product backlog is getting prioritized. So all the remaining chapters or all the remaining lessons will some way talk about Scrum and this particular framework. So in this particular lessons we have looked at a framework in a way that we get an idea what is Scrum is all about. Subsequently we will get into the selected topics, like when we talk about estimation we will focus how the estimation is done in a product backlog. When we talk about prioritization we will focus on how the functionality gets prioritized. So that is something which is getting covered in subsequent lessons. I have used extract from Mike Cohen's presentation, and I have used the reference material Scrum Guide and Agile Project Management with Scrum. The Agile Project Management with Scrum is a reference book which is also recommended by PMI. It's a part of 11 reference book. Drop me a mail if a section or part of this presentation is not clear to you. We can discuss it over the mail, and I would try my best to answer it in a shortest possible time. Thank you.